All right, well, I'm looking at our press RSVP list. There's a few other folks that said they would come, but they can join late if they want. And so I figure to respect everyone's time, let's just kick things off and get started. So again, my name's Evan Greer. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the Deputy Director of Fight for the Future. We're a digital rights nonprofit that works to protect people's basic rights in the digital age. And very excited to have here a coalition of representatives from organizations who have been making various different demands around platforms and tech companies like Zoom in terms of doing more to protect users, to protect marginalized communities, and keep people safe. And so I'm going to kind of kick things off here, and I'll sort of moderate. We have a great list of guests, and instead of listing off all of their names now and then going back and saying them again, I'm just going to kind of move us through and introduce folks as we go. And so quickly, I'll just say that we at Fight for the Future have been long-time proponents of strong end-to-end encryption. We think end-to-end encryption is one of the most important forms of technology protecting people's basic human rights. It's also been much maligned, and so we think it's really important in this moment that companies not only move in this direction, but really become proponents of and defenders of this type of encryption technology that prevents government agencies or corporations from meddling in our communications in ways that put people at risk. And so I think, and I'm going to kick it to Bruce Schneier in just a moment to really kind of dive into the technical elements here. But I think this is actually a great moment for this press conference because Zoom actually really has been responding to the pressure that has been put on them. And there has been a tremendous amount of pressure as they've exploded in popularity. Many organizations, dozens of organizations have been campaigning, have signed on to open letters, have organized petitions. And I think we're seeing now the impact of that grassroots advocacy. And it really does seem like Zoom is starting to take some really significant steps in the right direction. They released a blog post this week that they've improved the encryption standard that they are using. They've dealt with a number of the other issues around giving hosts more control to prevent things like harassment on their platform. So we're seeing some improvements, and now we're really focusing in on what we see as kind of the most important thing that they could do to protect vulnerable people, which is to implement end-to-end encryption by default on as many of their video calls as possible. So particularly thinking about activist groups, folks organizing meetings, folks who need their communications to be protected from an authoritarian government or law enforcement agencies, they should be able to use Zoom safely. And we know that encryption that can be broken by a company is really only as strong or only as trustworthy as how much you trust that company. And we also know that Zoom does business in a lot of different countries and will be under a tremendous amount of pressure from various governments to hand over those kind of keys to the kingdom or access in real time to our communications. One of the things that Zoom has said in some of their blog posts is, oh, actually, we've never had a request from law enforcement to decrypt video calls in transit. Well, that's about to change because Zoom has now become incredibly popular. So it's only a matter of time before they're going to be under tremendous pressure from governments to again, give them access to our communications, which is something that could directly lead to not just to harm to our communities, but to actual loss of life. So this is a really serious issue and something that we need to take seriously. And I think that's why we're all coming together. We all have various different concerns about Zoom and similar services, but we all agree strongly that one of the biggest, most important things that they could do to protect people is to implement strong end-to-end encryption wherever possible. We know that when WhatsApp did that, it instantly protected billions of people's communications. It was arguably one of the most impactful things that any company has done to protect people in the modern age. Zoom could lead the way by doing the same. And they're really best positioned at this point to do this for video conferencing. So I'll take a pause there and kick it over to Bruce Schneier, who needs no introduction, but is a security expert and all-around nice guy, and who can explain kind of some of the technical pieces of this that, using end-to-end encryption on video calls is challenging, but not impossible. So Bruce, is that an okay tee up for you? And can you get into that for us?
Yes, that's excellent. Thanks. And thanks everyone for coming. We've gone a long way since mid-March when we suddenly were all thrust into using Zoom. I've been using it to teach a class at Harvard. My company's been using it. I'm using it for personal reasons. And in the beginning, I mean, Zoom was not prepared for this. And there's a lot of writing about insecurities in the platform. And I think they've done a great job, echoing Evan, trying to get better. Recently, two things have been published. The NSA just published guidance on video conferencing platforms and security and privacy. Mozilla did also. I'll link to both of them in a blog post that I'll put in the chat here. So go look at what the NSA says about all these platforms. It's interesting. What we know about Zoom and end-to-end encryption is that they do it sort of. So I want to talk about really what we mean. When we talk about end-to-end encryption, what we mean is the conversation is encrypted on your device, and then it's decrypted on the device of the person you're talking to. So we get that in iMessage, we get that in WhatsApp, we get that in PGP email. Nobody in the middle can eavesdrop. The other way to do it is what's called link encryption, and that's what you have with Gmail. Your email is encrypted from your computer to Google servers, where it is decrypted, and it's stored there. And then, of course, it's encrypted again when it is sent from Google to whoever you're sending it to. And that is the other way of doing things. What we know about Zoom is that they do end-to-end if two things are true. One, if everybody is using the Zoom app. So right now we have a multi-party conversation here. Some of us could be on the app. Some of us could be using the website. If one of us is using the website, none of us get end-to-end encryption. The other thing is that if this meeting is not being recorded. So if you look to your upper left, you will see this meeting is recorded. Actually, a caveat, if it's not being recorded in the cloud. So if this meeting is being recorded in the cloud, I actually don't know if it is, then there's not end-to-end encryption, really because Zoom needs the key because they are dealing with the recording. So that's good. And Zoom's done actually done a lot of work in the past month and a half to make themselves more secure. The one thing we still don't know is how the keys are generated. Strong end-to-end encryption means the encryption key is held by you and the person you're talking to and nobody else. Near as we can tell from the way Zoom works, and we know this from work Citizen Lab has done, is that the keys are generated by Zoom and then distributed. So that does not give you true end-to-end encryption because Zoom has a copy of the keys. There's actually no reason why this has to be done this way. They could do it another way. And my hope is, as they continue to improve, they will fix this key management problem. And if they do, then we have true end-to-end secure encryption, and then we all rejoice.
Great, thanks, Bruce. So quickly, Bruce, could you also just elaborate on, so in your opinion, it would be possible for Zoom to implement end-to-end as a default on video calls for at least up to some number of people. Is that
yes, it is possible. Now, so it's hard because the more people you get in the conference, the more pairwise communications there are. And that's the way we'll do end-to-end. If you look at the way some of the other video platforms have done end-to-end, it tends to get, it bogs down a lot when you have large conferences. So like my Harvard class, which is 50 plus students. That might not actually even be doable given the old bandwidth we have. But for small meetings, definitely for point-to-point, you can do it, and they can do it. And near as we can tell, they've done most of the hard stuff. Fixing the key management is the one piece they have left.
Got it. So, I mean, to me, that's encouraging that, we're sort of on the cusp of this, and with a little bit of a push in the right direction, this is technically possible, and they could provide this type of encryption security for most of the scenarios where it would really matter, right? For small activist meetings, for someone meeting with their therapist, for the types of things where, it is really clear that we need this type of security.
All the way up to Boris Johnson having cabinet meetings on Zoom. I mean, Zoom got really thrust into the main stage. They were not ready for this, and they've done an admirable job so far. I think we should really applaud the work they did, both in encryption and in the user interface. And their blog post from last week talks a lot about the things they're doing, and they're rolling out at the end of this month. There's going to be sort of a hard change to make this work. But yes, I mean, just a little bit more, and I think they're up for it. I'm optimistic we will get this change.
Great. Thanks so much, Bruce Schneier. So I'm going to kick it next to Sasha Meinrath, who is the director of XLab.
Thanks, Evan. So Bruce has talked a little bit about how end-to-end can be built and that it is viable for this kind of medium. I think it's also important to remember that we've sort of regressed when you look at original Skype, for example, which was more peer-to-peer, one-to-one communication. That was encrypted by default. Signal is encrypted by default. When you look at what Jitsi has been doing on their multi-party video conferencing platform, they're ahead of Zoom in building out technologies that would enable end-to-end encryption by default. And this matters a lot, and we're facing in the United States, and this is a very particular problem to the US, a bill, a statutory mandate called the Communications Assistance for Law Enforcement Act, which de facto can be interpreted to require companies to have worse service, less secure service, less private services for US users. And I think that's really a problem. This CALEA mandate covers all manner of sin. In essence, companies say, well, Congress's mandate that our system must be surveillable. And so they build these things, and they're like, well, as long as we built it to be surveillable, we might as well collect some user information. We might as well add in some additional de facto surveillance of various users. And so we end up down this path that I think is pretty terrible. It's terrible just for everyday users. It's particularly problematic for already oppressed, marginalized, alienated, and surveilled groups. And what we've seen over time is even though CALEA was meant to be used for targeted surveillance with warrants on a case-by-case basis, today it's actually being used to collect hundreds of millions of data points on pretty much everyone, pretty much all the time, to the point that the NSA itself has said, some of the things we're doing, we can no longer do because we couldn't figure out a way to do it legally. And in that environment, when we're building bad privacy technology, it's a real problem for everyone. And by opening this Pandora's box, by creating poorly designed security, we open the door for every other country on earth to do exactly the same thing, to mandate, we want you, Zoom, to use your US version in China, in Iran, all around the globe. And we've seen what this does. It undermines security for a global populace. It sets a new international norm for poor security. And it, in the end, pretty much always comes back to haunt us. So in essence, what we're saying is, hey, we're the canaries in the coal mine. We're saying this is a bad idea. It's been bad historically. It's bad today. The people that are most detrimentally impacted are the same individuals that have been oppressed previously. So Zoom has the opportunity, in essence, to do something far better. And that's really what we're calling for. Build strong, secure communications technologies that maintain the integrity of our data, of our persona, of our communications itself. Thanks, Evan.
Well, thanks, Sasha. All right, I'm going to kick it next to Jelani, campaign manager at Kairos. So yeah, Jelani.
Thanks, Evan. Start a little bit about Kairos quickly, and then I'll jump into Zoom. So Kairos, we're an organization that helps build leadership of people of color. And we really are working to ensure that technology and the infrastructure that supports technology, the internet, other digital platforms, are a place where people of color can thrive as well. And that's what I really want to start with this. And coming in talking about Zoom and end-to-end encryption, really thinking about the marginalized people that Sasha was mentioning in talking. So end-to-end encryption definitely has become a buzzword, and I think companies like Zoom have like thrown it onto their security white pages to lure privacy conscious users in. And we also know, like what Bruce was saying, like privacy, like without this privacy and security feature, everyone is put into harm's way. But the burden disproportionately falls on Black and brown communities, and I want to be explicit about that. Throughout history, we know that Black and brown communities have been disproportionate victims of surveillance and over-policing. And as technology becomes more intertwined with our daily lives, that quite shameful history continues online and causes unwarranted surveillance to Black and brown communities, which is a danger to our privacy. So I think demanding like end-to-end encryption, like this full end-to-end encryption on platforms like Zoom is one way we start to take control of how we interact with digital platforms on a daily basis. It creates a safe place for everyone online. And it also ensures that communities of color, who, like I said, are the most affected by this, can use digital platforms from everything from healthcare to school to organizing with minimal threats of surveillance. I think it's all, I think we also know here that like the intersection between Black and brown communities and racial justice and gender justice exists, and so do organizing communities, right? So Black and brown people, queer people, women are all trying to like organize and fight for our rights, and we do it now in this moment of life that we're in of COVID-19 online. And so yeah, demanding end-to-end encryption is just something that we have to do, and we have to start taking that seriously. So that's what I have, and I'll kick it back to Evan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jelani. And folks should definitely check out Kairos as well. And also folks should feel free to drop links to their organizations or anything that you want folks to, like journalists, to know about into the chat as well. And yeah, and quickly, I'll just agree that I think it's really important also that we meet people where they're at and not make this about like, oh, well, if you use Zoom, then like it's your fault if you get spied on. You know, we should be trying to make every platform as safe as possible for everyone and recognize that, you know, many people don't necessarily have a choice about what platform they're using, especially if they're being forced to use it for school or, you know, the group that they're part of is using it for a meeting. You're going to show up to the Zoom. So I think that's why we're organizing instead of just telling people to go use a different platform. So up next, we have Albert Fox-Kahn, who's the Executive Director of the Surveillance Technology Oversight Project. Albert.
Evan, thank you so much for inviting me to give a brief remark. The Surveillance Technology Oversight Project is a New York-based nonprofit that focuses on the growth of warrantless surveillance at the state and local level and how those technologies are empowering police departments to target communities of color and empowering ICE to target our undocumented neighbors. And we see in this, you know, debate over Zoom's encryption and continuation of those ongoing fights to ensure that the digital infrastructure we use as a society are protecting all of our neighbors. You know, at a time when Zoom is a lifeline for our families, companies, and communities, we need end-to-end encryption to protect our most intimate moments together. You know, Zoom has improved their security, but we need to fully deploy end-to-end encryption to talk with our friends and loved ones without second guessing how everything we say will be used against us. You know, encryption has always been indispensable to secure communication, but as we're physically apart today, it's even more important than ever. And I really want to echo Jelani's point that this is not something that will be seen applied equally to all Americans. We know that law enforcement will use these technologies to target Black and brown communities just as they have for decades, for centuries. That this is going to be a continuation of the discriminatory policing that has unfortunately defined much of American history. But in this moment when we are working when we're all so physically isolated, we have an opportunity to either enable government to have more tools than ever to monitor everything we say and to track every movement we make, or we can go down another path where we create the infrastructure for true privacy and ensure that we preserve the values that are so central to a democratic society. So thank you again, Evan.
Cool, thanks so much, Albert. Okay, so I'm going to kick it now over to Tracy Rosenberg, Executive Director of Media Alliance. Tracy. And right now, Tracy, I think both your video and audio are muted, so you might have to unmute for us to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Evan, and good morning. I'm Tracy Rosenberg. I'm from Media Alliance. We are a 47-year-old democratic communications advocate based in Northern California. Our focus is primarily on communications platforms and how they work for community-based organizations. And this, of course, is incredibly important right now. And our message to Zoom is that half measures or partial fixes or solutions are simply not enough. I don't think that Zoom expected to find itself in this position. They have become the sort of go-to communications platform for essentially the entire country, and I don't think anybody saw that coming except perhaps in their dreams. But the reality is here and now, and all of us, we are doing things online that frankly we should not be doing online, but we have no other choice. So we're concerned here about law enforcement surveillance, as people have spoken about. Community organizing is of interest to law enforcement, always has been and always will be. But there are also security issues with hacking and break-ins and bad actors of sort of all sorts. When you talk about a therapy session, when you talk about people's presence at work, when you talk about intimate family conversations, when you talk about medical consultations, these are the kinds of things that have to be protected. And the reality here is that Zoom has done an awful lot, and there's an awful lot more to go. And it's required at this time. So we really hope that Zoom will sort of take this as encouragement to take that last and final step that is basically required in order for us to be able to rely on them. Because otherwise we're basically taking our most private communications and we're basically laying it out there for anyone and everyone to partake of. And that is long-term a threat to our physical safety and a threat to our ability to organize, to dissent, and to speak back to power. And those are fundamentally the most American values that we have. Thanks for the opportunity to speak, and I hope that Zoom will take us up on this opportunity that we are offering them to just lift up their game and do things a bit better.
Cool, thanks so much, Tracy. I'm gonna kick it now over to Folashade Pine, Campaign Manager of Color Change.
Again, thank you for having me, Evan, and Fight for the Future. Thank you for everybody who's here. As she mentioned, I am a campaign manager at Color Change, and I have the luxury and opportunity of leading this campaign about Zoom. And the way it was introduced to Color Change is one of our members was defending his dissertation on Zoom's platform, and his dissertation was hijacked by racist trolls who drew images of genitalia and wrote racist language on the screen and shared pictures of pornography in the midst of his dissertation where his grandmother and his entire family were watching. And so we, were made aware of the work that he was doing to combat Zoom and found out that Zoom gave him a very weak response to this and referred him to their Party Crashers guide as a way to solve this issue of cyber terrorism. And in the process of this, we ran this campaign and learned more about Zoom. And the end-to-end encryption issue became of utmost importance in addition to the racist cyber attacks that have been harming Black, brown, women, and marginalized communities across the internet since Zoom has blown up during this pandemic. So in a time of increased fear and anxiety, Zoom has chosen to place the onus on the users to stop the cyber terrorism and to protect ourselves. And it's ethically irresponsible and unacceptable. Right now, they're the largest video communication platform, and they can't afford to have the growing number of racist cyber attacks infiltrate their system. And we're calling on them to commit to a plan that specifically combats racial injustice on its platform, which includes end-to-end encryption. And we have several demands to Zoom. One is to release a specific plan to combat racial harassment on its platform, to hire a chief diversity officer to mitigate issues of discrimination and inequality on its platform, to create a mandatory community commitment for Zoom users that affirms the platform as a safe place for all users, regardless of race, religion, national origin, ethnicity, disability, sex, gender identity, sexual orientation, or age. And we also are asking them to issue a formal apology to all the victims of Zoom bombing, and of course, to implement default end-to-end encryption for all video, audio, and text. Now pass it back to you, Evan.
Awesome, thank you so much. And I know, Color Change helped collect thousands or maybe even tens of thousands of signatures on that campaign. And I should have mentioned earlier that Fight for the Future and many of the other groups here have another 30,000 or so signatures from people who are calling on Zoom to implement end-to-end encryption. So thank you so much for your work in organizing on this. All right, our last panelist. Is this a panel? I don't know. What are we doing right now? Our last person, our last human who will speak today is Samina Usman, who's the Government Relations Coordinator at the Council on American-Islamic Relations, CARE, in San Francisco's office. So Samina.
Yes, hello, good morning. My name is Samina Usman, and I'm speaking on behalf of the San Francisco Bay Area office of the Council on American-Islamic Relations, or CARE SFBA. CARE is America's largest Muslim civil liberties and advocacy organization. And like most organizations during this global pandemic, CARE has adjusted all of our operations to enable us to work remotely. We use a variety of tools to conduct our meetings and webinars, including the use of Zoom. We are concerned about multiple reports from community members of Zoom meetings getting hacked. Multiple Muslim leaders' classes were hacked with Islamophobic posts. A teacher in Contra Costa County reported that his class was hacked with racial slurs. Even my own child's class was hacked with inappropriate pictures, and their school was targeted multiple times. We need to protect our children and our community from being exposed to such material or slurs. And as Jelani mentioned, communities of color, including the Muslim community, have been the focus of surveillance for decades. It is very concerning that our constitutionally protected private communications should be monitored and compromised by these surveillance efforts. And while Zoom has made some efforts to improve security, we strongly believe that end-to-end encryption will better protect our privacy and our security. Our children should be protected with having a safe learning environment. Our community should not be harassed in their webinars or gatherings or be the targets of surveillance. As we rely on tools like Zoom to continue our work of serving and advocating for the community, Zoom must do all it can to earn the community's trust by placing stringent security protections in place. We have enough fear with this global pandemic. We should not have to fear who or what's entering our apps as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Samina. And so thanks to everyone. I think we've really laid out, both what's the concern, and then, what are the steps that need to be taken. And, just to bring it back to, all of the different groups here have various different approaches and issues that we've raised with Zoom. And we all agree strongly that one of the most important things they can do to protect people is by implementing default end-to-end encryption wherever possible. So I'll quickly just leave some space if any, there's a handful of journalists who are on the call. If any of you all want to ask a quick question to any of the folks here, we'll take some time for that. And otherwise, we will let everyone get back to being bored and isolated, or homeschooling, or doing it at whatever we need to do. And folks can always feel free to follow up with questions as well. And if you have a question for a specific person here, we can make sure that they get it.